Immanuel Kant was one of the great 18th century philosophers, and he's exactly as smug as he looks, but not entirely without justification, to be fair to him. This Preliminary to Metaphysics was published in 1783 and was an introduction or primer for those who found his critique of pure reason to be too big and hard for them. In this video, we will look at the first transcendental problem, which is to ask how mathematics is possible as a discipline. Disclaimer, I am not an academic, take me with a pinch of salt and tongue-in-cheek. Even where I have indicated quotes, it is likely at minimum paraphrased for brevity. Comment below if you think I have severely misunderstood. From what we know of maths, its propositions are pure reason, but they are also synthetic, as there is always an operation as well as an entity that is operated on. Furthermore, says Kant, our mathematical faculty cannot be based on experience, hence mathematical knowledge is key to the process of uncovering synthetic a priori knowledge. But these foundations are not clearly accessible to us, so we must look for this basis in the effects we can see. All mathematical knowledge first appears in intuition. The intuition is a basic internal picture-making ability of our cognitive power. Without a pure a priori intuition, no mathematical operation can proceed. You need concepts to work with, and those concepts are quite different, more pure for a start, from the things that exist empirically. But concepts combined with an operation is a synthesis, and so these mathematical propositions are, at the same time, still synthetic. Kant does urge caution, though. Surely to make a picture of something, we require that thing to be present or have been present. It seems impossible to intuit a priori with no external stimulus. Kant asserts that we can actually form abstract concepts a priori, but we can only get meaning from them when they are applied to something in the world. The question can therefore be simplified to, how can intuition of an object precede the object itself? Kant begins the next section with an astonishing admission. If intuition had to represent things as they really are in themselves, he says, then it could never take place a priori. He presents this as the common sense position, although he avoids calling it such to avoid the critique that he made against the critics of Hume in the previous video. Of course we cannot access the things in themselves, he says. The qualities of an object itself can never migrate into my mind, the blueness, the hardness, the spikiness, or whatever. So what we have must be representations, and this is all that we have. Thus, the only way that an intuition can precede an object is if it is not of the object itself, but rather of the form of my sensibility. So what then is the form of sensibility? Let us consider the idea of a thing in itself, which we have no access to and can never have access to. The form of our sensibility is the structure of our perceptive awareness which leaves its marks on that representation that we cognize as sensation. Here it is, and when we perceive an object through the form of sensibility, we have a cognition that includes those marks. A note on my pictorial metaphor here. First, the form of sensibility is designed to fit the shape that I've used for the single thing in itself, in this case a trapezoid shape, but it is really a structure through which we form all of our representations. Second, I have shown, and it is implied from Kant referring to marks, that sensibility's effect on the thing in itself is relatively subtle, which is intuitively true, but not necessary according to what Kant asserts. The crucial point for metaphysics is that this form of sensibility is available to us prior to us ever using it to perceive anything, from which we infer that we can know a priori that all our intuitions will always conform to this form of our sensibility, which includes our concepts of time and space. So whatever our knowledge of synthetic a priori propositions, it concerns only representations and never the things in themselves. Space and time are the key parts of our representation-forming faculty. They are the abstract substratum that everything empirical occurs within. They are also basic intuitions of mathematics. Space grounds the concepts of geometry. Time, or perhaps sequential process, grounds the concepts of arithmetic. These things are absolutely a priori, but they are still part of our form of sensibility, so they give no access to the things in themselves. So the answer to the first transcendental problem is that pure maths works because it operates with empirical intuitions that are based on the pure intuitions of space and time. Kant addresses a possible objection that space and time could be qualities of objects in themselves. But how, in that case, can we have a priori intuitions of them? Which we can. Kant can fairly say that anything that makes up our form of sensibility is a part of us, i.e. internal, rather than being in the object itself. But this basic model of intuition and perception, brilliant though it is, has simply been asserted by Kant to be true. To clarify what we have just talked about, what is geometric congruence in this context? Geometric congruence is simply to say that two figures coincide perfectly. This kind of assertion is synthetic and is pure and a priori. Otherwise, they could not be necessary. This is, and Kant is aware of this, moving towards idealism, and he gives two different and appropriate metaphors for what he means. But the basic idea is of a transcendental deduction which enables time, space, and causality. If we did not have such a deduction, we could still do mathematics, but we wouldn't have any insight into what it is. To which I reply, what the hell does that even mean? And I know what it means, but what does it mean? It means, I think, that in that case we would see the laws of math function, but we would not have any association of this truth with an ongoing world. But that is just a sentence, and the very structure of the sentence reveals the contradiction approaching like an oncoming train. Kant suggests another objection to an external understanding of time and space, and this one I think holds up less well, if I understand it correctly. Kant claims that there is some sort of change that we can place upon the representation which does not reflect the object, giving the example of a hand and its reflection. Apparently the fact that we cannot map one onto the other exactly is some kind of knockdown argument against materialism. I don't think that's true in the best of cases, but I would question if the operation of reflection is a valid metaphor here, and if it is, then can we not just reflect it twice and get our mapping back? If it's valid to do once, it's valid to do a second time. Finally, and after Kant wrote, to be fair, we've also discovered the concept of chirality, which is precisely the quality of differences in kind that occur because of spatial arrangement. For Kant, this problem of chirality was supposed to demonstrate that representations of space are constrained in a way that the thing in itself is not. These are presumably among the marks made by the form of sensibility. Problem 1 is concluded, but there are 3 notes which are basically Kant trying to nail down a few loose ends. Note 1 starts with a repeated admission. If the senses were supposed to represent objects as they really are, then sensibility would not necessarily cohere with reality, which is sure to rouse the ghost of Hume, to be fair. But Kant clarifies, because representations are mental phenomena, and perfect mathematical geometry is a mental phenomena, so we cannot necessarily expect our a priori geometry to match up perfectly with the thing in itself. But we can expect it to match up perfectly with our experience and observations, because those also come to us through the form of our sensibility, which we can also know a priori. Note 2 is a defense against claims that Kant is an idealist. Isn't he, after all, reducing the objects we see to pseudo-Platonic ideal forms? And Kant says, no! The idealist believes there are only minds, no real objects. Kant believes the objects are real, but that our perceptions do not relate us to the things in themselves. He references Lockean qualities and makes a nice metaphor there, finishing rather testily to the effect of, it is not enough for me to say that our representations are perfectly appropriate, because I do say that, and I still get slandered. But I will not go one step further and say that our representations are exactly like the things in themselves, because there is no evidence for this. In Note 3, he is still fending off idealism, as maybe this loss of the thing in itself makes the whole sensible world into some kind of dream or delusion or illusion. But let's flip the script here. The real mistake is to believe that the sensible intuition is identical with the thing in itself. All Kant is claiming is that sensibility is grounded in the mind, and that is where knowledge resides, and also that sensibility can provide only appearances to the understanding. The appearances are then subject to the judgments of understanding, and we cannot blame the senses for errors of judgment. To illustrate the error of judgment, consider the retrograde motion of a planet like Mars when Earth overtakes it. Our representation clearly shows the retrograde motion over time, but the error is to make the judgment that the planet is actually going backwards at these times. Even the Ptolemaic system recognized that. But if we assume a few of the main points of the above argument, then we can be confident that we will not fall into error if I treat all sensations as appearances, and we can use them then without questioning their ontological status. The assumption that I will not fall into error is a brave one, and the Ptolemaic system shows why. But one can use these representations to apply to experience, and this is the only way to get a priori knowledge of external intuition, by applying mathematics to space and time. Now it is time to go on the offensive. Those who demand that perception gives access to the thing in itself make the error of taking as valid for everything something that is rather a subjective condition of the intuition of sensibility, valid only for objects of sense. A mistake which causes the transcendental illusion of metaphysics, and that is akin to belief in ideal forms, says Kant. So Kant's position, in fact, is the one that better respects the real and does not deal in things that are transcendent, at least not completely. And here we must finish off by looking at the transcendent itself. The doctrine Kant asserts is called transcendental idealism, which is neither the empirical idealism of Descartes nor the visionary idealism of Berkeley. To show this, as best I can, take the basic concept of an object and some abstract idea associated with it. When the object is abstracted beyond any connection to experience, it transcends experience. Conversely, when an abstract idea is used to argue into the empirical realm, this is a transcendental assertion. The transcendent exists beyond any connection with the empirical world, and the transcendental is the boundary that designates where that connection is lost. The difference between this position and the others is that while all idealism involves doubt, the transcendent idealist does not doubt the existence of things in themselves, merely our access to them. Kant suggests an alternative name for his theory is critical idealism, and then, somewhat sarcastically, suggests that if you think the representation is, in some clear way, the thing in itself, then maybe we should call that dreaming idealism. And that is the end of the first transcendental problem. We will look at the second transcendental problem in the next video. In the meantime, you can like this video if you've enjoyed it. Bye for now.